I'm at the club.
24 snaps, 7 layers. From two girls casually snapping selfies with their victim minutes before taking her life, to a woman unknowingly posting her final moments on Snapchat during a nightclub shooting. These are some of the most disturbing snaps to ever come out of the platform. The further we go down the iceberg, the more we realize how Snapchat's privacy-heavy features can easily turn into a death sentence if misused. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Falling into traffic for Snap. In September of 2020, a woman fell out of her car window while filming herself taking the perfect Snapchat video. The accident occurred on the M25 motorway south of London, where the car the woman was in was going at speeds well above 110 miles per hour. In fact, the video she took before she fell onto the road literally captioned, "I need to stop doing this at 110 miles per hour, I'ma end up dead." Thankfully, though, despite falling out of a speeding car, she remained unharmed. However, understandably, the UK police weren't happy with it. They showed their disdain on Twitter by posting the picture of the passenger side of the car coupled with the caption, "The front seat passenger was hanging out of the car whilst filming a Snapchat video along the M25. She then fell out of the car and into a live lane. It's only by luck she wasn't seriously injured or killed." When they were asked by another Twitter user whether these people, including the driver, were called out, they replied, "Every chance they worked it out before we spoke to them about it." The scarier part is, this woman was lucky enough to survive, but there have been numerous similar cases where the ones partaking in this stupid stunt end up losing their lives. That's not a bird. On November 2nd, 2015, Australian Snapchat and Reddit user Skinner shares a series of videos on his Snap showing his parents' birds to his audience. The videos essentially just consist of him going to each one of the 3 birds individually and introducing them. 2 of the 3 birds are located in front of Skinner's front door, which is visible from his camera. In the first clip, he goes to his cockatiel and introduces him. It's a perfectly normal, maybe even adorable video that passes by in an instant. In the second clip, he goes to his rainbow lorikeet and introduces it, and instantly transitions into introducing his puffin. The videos themselves are so quick that unless you sit down and hyper-focus on them, there's probably a major chance you'll miss the anomaly. After posting his clips, Skinner gets a reply from one of his friends. The friend appreciates his birds, but instantly asks him who the person is in the back of the second clip. That gets Skinner's radar going. He goes back to his stories to rewatch them, and sure enough, there's a weird apparition looking into the house through the main doors. After collective effort from Reddit users, OP manages to isolate the image. What he makes out of it leaves him horrified. The picture basically shows a man behind the front door looking into Skinner's house with immense interest. Based on the low-quality image, it can be assumed that he's cupped his hands against his face, like one would do if they were trying to focus their sight on one thing. This leaves Skinner creeped out beyond belief. He recounts the time as a kid when he would get nightmares and sleep paralysis in the same house. He remembers seeing a fairly similar image of a man looking into his room outside his window. Naturally, for the next few days, Skinner goes on high alert. Every little sound or triggered motion sensor light begins to fuel his paranoia to the point where he can't function properly. That's when something much scarier happens a few days later. Skinner, in his second Reddit post, explains that the second time he felt really scared was when he was home alone once again and started to hear loud banging and screeching from the outside. He goes out, takes his camera with him, and tries to record everything just in case. You can hear the banging sound in the back of the videos he's shared. Ultimately, he patrols around the entire house, finds nothing, and goes back to whatever he was doing before. It's only until he posts the video on Reddit does he get bombarded with messages telling him there's a man inside the house this time around. Like clockwork, Skinner shuffles through his clips once more, isolates it, and finds a weirdly large-looking apparition standing at the far end of one of the rooms. The strange man disappears literally the next minute, but has already been caught on video. This spooks OP beyond belief and prompts him to pack his bags and leave. It even forces him to call the police, who basically pins the entire thing on robbers that might have tried to steal a few valuables, but failed because of how diligent Skinner was with his filming. Eventually, things go quiet, and the last we hear is Skinner and his partner staying with a friend. Ranking friends. In a now defunct premium feature, Snapchat introduced a similar friend ranking system. The gist of the entire thing was that if you were subscribed to Snapchat's monthly $4 subscription, you had the option to see how much your friends were snapping you. Based on that, you'd receive a rank of closeness with them. Mercury was the highest ranking planet, which meant that your friend was snapping you the most. Then came Venus, Earth, Mars, and so on. The one friend on your list you were least closest to was Neptune, which in teenage language basically meant that the two of you hated each other. Naturally, a system this arbitrary was not going to be taken as such by the largest demographic of the app. Young people using Snapchat began to take it way too seriously. They would subscribe to the premium version of the app just to obsessively use the ranking system. They would even go as far as to rely on this ranking system to define their real-life friendships and relationships. In no reality is this a healthy coping mechanism. It's highly triggering and gives so many of these people anxiety issues. Worst-case scenarios would cause massive conflicts between people that would end up in all-out brawls and bullying. Eventually, this would culminate in a lack of social skills, self-isolation, and more mental health issues. Snapchat ultimately ended up removing the feature by default. You can only turn it on willingly if you want to. According to the devs, Snapchat Plus subscribers who want more friendship insights can proactively turn it on, and those who don't will never have to see it. The question is this nearly enough to reverse all the years of damage features such as these have caused to young people? Level 2. Snapchat Dysmorphia. Snapchat dysmorphia isn't just a trendy term that originated from the internet randomly. It's an actual phenomenon that causes people, particularly young impressionable ones, to completely lose connection with their own bodies. It's an actual condition that causes people to fixate on what they perceive as flaws. This gives rise to mass insecurity, which in turn pushes these people to look as perfect as possible physically, even if it means going through medical and surgical procedures that may or may not even work. On paper, Snapchat filters are simply just goofy visual effects to pass time. But in reality, most of them distort a person's pictures to an unhealthy degree. Some of them simply morph the user into fun-looking caricatures, while others go a bit extreme and change the user's look to a more socially acceptable one. The latter ones basically fix a user's physical and aesthetic imperfections and make them the perfect versions of themselves. The thing is, a concept like that shouldn't exist in the first place. Everyone is perfect in their own right, and a filter is the last thing that should make you feel bad about yourself. But the reality is, impressionable and insecure people are massive victims to them. These filters often exaggerate features considered attractive in Western beauty standards. They lighten your skin tones, make your eyes larger, and squeeze noses into more defined, smaller appendages. It's basically a tried and tested way to further distance people from their natural appearance. Over time, frequent exposure to these enhanced versions can lead to dissatisfaction about yourself, eventual social and general anxiety, and maybe even EDs. Consistent use of these beauty filters can further impact self-esteem and increase the risk of developing BDD-like symptoms. And with how normalized they have become pertaining to influencer culture, literally every picture we see online is edited perfectly. So ultimately, an unfiltered face starts to feel inadequate, leading to excessive obsession about extreme, almost medically alarming reliance on aesthetic procedures and dangerous plastic surgeries. Jonathan Chow. Jonathan Chow was a 17-year-old from Singapore who lost his life in a terrible Snapchat incident that could have been prevented entirely if the people involved were just a little more aware. Jonathan and his friend were hanging around a mall when he got the idea to make a Snapchat video. His plan was to have his friend film him while he jumped off a window in the mall and onto the ledge. He literally asked his friend to help me make a Snapchat video and I'll jump. Tragically, those were Jonathan's last words. What happened was the ledge he jumped on was very flimsy and collapsed the second his feet touched it. It looked fairly concrete, but was made of weak material that could not sustain Jonathan's weight. He jumped onto it, and instead of finding his footing, fell from 4 floors onto the ground. His friend, who later only identified herself as Ruth, recalled how both of them had decided to take turns jumping. What she didn't realize was that the ledge was only a plasterboard used for decorative purposes. Later on, Jonathan's parents actively called out the mall management for making the plasterboard look that way. They rightfully believed that it looked wide enough to be walked on, so it was only natural for a curious person to believe it was safe. His father further said he, Jonathan, was a friendly guy, sociable and approachable. He was about to be enlisted for national service and was looking forward to it, but now he won't be able to serve the nation. Sadly, once again, this tragedy is not an isolated one. It literally stems from the same mindset that prompted the woman from the UK to dangle outside her car for a video. The need to feel validated by strangers online is so high amongst young people that they can literally put their lives in danger for it. Illegal activity. The only way Snapchat stands out from its other social media app counterparts is because of its disappearing messages option. Disappearing messages were designed for untraceability and privacy. Most of its users are essentially just drawn to this very feature. However, like with every novel invention, this one also has its trade-offs. The disappearing messages feature has essentially turned the app into a convenient tool for illegal drug deals. And at every authority figure's horror is something that's been quietly escalating over the past few years. Dealers have started using Snapchat stories and private messages to advertise and distribute counterfeit pills, many of which contain the extremely potent opioid fentanyl. These drugs often appear in photos and are labeled with obscure emojis or vague text that simply just hint towards them. And since these messages disappear within seconds, there's no trace or receipts, and worst of all, very little accountability. It's become increasingly difficult for law enforcement and families to track down conversations after their loved ones are either fully addicted or worse, overdosed. In a lot of these tragic cases, young people were sold what they believed to be prescription pills. Drugs like Xanax or Percocet were advertised, only for the other person to unknowingly end up messing with high doses of fentanyl. It became such a raging problem that more than 20 families ended up suing the app in the wake of the death of their loved ones. And while the platform claims that it's working closely with law enforcement to combat this, these measures are way too slow for the rate at which people are being impacted. The dangers of Snap Maps. Snap Maps is another Snapchat feature that is, on the surface, extremely novel and fun. But if used improperly, it can not only be unhinged, but outright devastating. It gives people a sort of accessibility to others that they should not have. This can primarily be proven by the case of Evan William Blankenship, who decided to take things a bit too literally with the girl he was pursuing. Things were going fine between them before they took a turn for the worse. Instead of being a normal person and communicating, Evan decided to track her down on Snap Maps. The crime occurred on Blue Ridge Parkway in October of 2023. The victim was in a car with a friend when Evan attacked her. He was fully armed with a gun and had every intention to use it to threaten her. He tried to pull her out of the vehicle with her hair and proceeded to threaten bodily harm on both her and her friend, essentially just holding both of them hostage. He then hit the victim in the face, which caused excessive bruising and even hearing loss. It's also reported that he shot some warning shots in the air to intimidate his victims. Eventually, though, the two of them somehow convinced Evan to let them go in exchange of them not reporting this to law enforcement. He was thankfully caught and was eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison. The thing with Snap Maps that a lot of people do not think about is the fact that once you add a stranger to your list, they can literally track your every movement down to the very street you're standing on. Most people don't even realize it's running, and by the time they do, someone like Evan has already misused it. Level 3. Maxwell Morton. Maxwell Morton and Ryan Mangan were friends who were close enough to hang out and play video games in the same room. During one of their video game sessions, Morton somehow came across a 9mm gun. Instead of being a responsible person and handing it over to an adult, the young man decided to mess around with it. What he didn't know was that the gun was loaded. Sometime during their hangout, Morton pointed the gun at his friend Ryan and pulled the trigger. Ryan died on the spot. What happened next was what immortalized this case on the internet. Instead of calling for help, Morton took a selfie with Ryan's body still in the chair beside him, and he sent it over Snapchat. The assumption, it seems, was that it would disappear just like any other snap, but the person who received it took a screenshot and alerted the police. The image became the key piece of evidence when Morton was arrested and charged. He later admitted to the shooting and was eventually convicted of third-degree murder, receiving a sentence of 15 to 30 years in prison. He claimed the shooting was accidental, and maybe it was, but the decision to take a photo and send it out to his friends doesn't really help his case. Maybe it's more about his detachment to such an emotionally charged moment, but the fact that he could not feel an ounce of remorse for what he did was just as disturbing as the act itself. It's easy to treat platforms like Snapchat as casual, low stakes, and, dare I say, safe spaces. But this case shows what happens when that mindset bleeds into some wicked people. Hey, Abyssal fans, quick update before we proceed. From now on, our icebergs will be 8 levels instead of 7. However, YouTube would take our channel down if we posted content that disturbing here, so we'll be posting it exclusively to our Patreon. If you'd like to watch the exclusive 8th level while supporting us at the same time, check out the first link in our description. Murder conviction due to Snapchat evidence. The Murdaugh family were a long list of lawyers in South Carolina that had some weight to their name in the area. That influence eventually ended up coming to a halt in 2021 when the latest lawyer in the family, Alex Murdaugh, was convicted for the murder of his son and wife. Alex's wife, Maggie, and his son Paul were found shot dead on their property. Before their deaths, Maggie was scheduled to meet with her husband at one of their hunting lodges in Islandton, but she allegedly already noticed something was wrong with her husband, which made her text her friend instantly, stating that her husband was acting suspicious. A few hours later, she and her son would be gunned down. The case would go on to become one of the most publicized trials in recent history. Initially, it was Alex who stumbled across his dead family and called 911. He claimed he wasn't at the property and was just as shocked as the rest of the world. But what cut through the noise was a 50-second Snapchat video. Paul, the son, had taken it just minutes before he died. It was a simple video of the family's dog, but the background audio revealed 3 voices. One of them was Alex.
He's got a bird in his mouth!
Bubba. Hey, Bubba.
It's a guinea.
This is a chicken.
Come here, Bubba.
Come here, Cash.
Come here, Bubba.
Cash.
This turned out to be a massive problem for the lawyer, considering how it was basically a prison sentence for him. That single clip became a cornerstone of the prosecution. It shifted the entire weight of the trial, and Alex was proven guilty on all counts of charges against him. Snapchat stalker. Another very violent example of SnapMap going wrong is the case of 20-year-old Victor Furman. Furman was a homeless man from Houston, Texas, who added his victim on Snapchat in hopes of cultivating some sort of relationship with her. The victim found that the two had mutuals on the platform, which made her add him onto her Snap. Unfortunately, what began as a distant acquaintanceship turned harrowing when Furman began to demand certain provocative favors from her. The victim, being young, denied his advances completely and blocked him off. That's when Furman's true disturbed nature peaked. Instead of leaving her alone, he started to make multiple fake accounts just to hound her with unhinged threats ranging from bodily harm to flat-out murder. This went on for months on end, but since these threats were all superficial, nobody thought Furman would actually act upon them. That's until he started to actually visit the victim's house after taking her address from SnapMap. It happened on 6 instances, and everybody was already on edge, but things were about to get worse. In December of 2024, everything boiled over. Furman somehow managed to wreck one of the windows in the house. This was finally the last straw, and active efforts were now being taken to arrest an unhinged man. They issued a warrant for his arrest and ultimately caught him a day later. Before his arrest, a few other details of Furman's threat on the victim came out. He had threatened to not only hurt her, but also her family and pets. On top of that, he had sent a picture of himself armed with a gun to the victim, in order to intimidate her more than she already was. Filmed overdose. Dennis Precca was a 22-year-old business law student at the University of Michigan. His parents remember him as an extraordinary, kind, and generous soul who only spread light wherever he went. He had big dreams and wanted to give something back to his community. Unfortunately, Dennis Precca was killed in 2019 at an acquaintance's house. Dennis was known for being smart and academic. Studying and helping people was a major part of his life. On the tragic day of his death in March of 2019, he was at a friend's house doing exactly that. Sometime during his study session, he asked someone for an Adderall to stay focused. Instead, his friends slipped him an MDMA. Not one to question anyone, Dennis simply popped the pill and resumed doing what he was doing. However, it wasn't long before extreme side effects started to kick in. Within hours, Dennis Precca was suffering from severe edema and lung and brain congestion. He was basically rendered completely unresponsive in literally no time. That's where things go from bad to downright malicious. Despite clearly not looking or feeling well, Dennis was not rushed to a hospital, nor was 911 called. Instead, his friends that were with him began to film him suffering through such pain. They were laughing at him, recording him, and were even showing mock sympathy for him. That video was then circulated on Snapchat in their circle of friends. It wasn't until hours later that 911 was called, but by then it was already too late. Dennis had died from a forced overdose. His parents sought out every legal channel they could. Eventually, they filed a lawsuit against all of the perpetrators and managed to win. They were awarded $75 million, and the case was marked as the largest single-death wrongful death verdict in Michigan's history. They've been very active since then and have even created a foundation in Dennis's name. Sadly, though, despite the win, the Precca family can never get their son back. Lucas Sutton. The dangers of Snapchat's disappearing messages is not lost on anyone. Using them for drug dealing is one thing, wrong in its own right. But when it's used to premeditate a comprehensive plan, you just know things are worse than what they seemed. Lucas Sutton was a 22-year-old father who tragically lost his life in one such malicious scheme. On May of 2023, Lucas was visiting a friend, Keen Williams, in Croydon on what seemed like an innocent night out. He was planning on catching up with Williams and hadn't really considered that this would be his last night alive. Keen Williams, with the help of another friend, Kai Nelson Palmer, were luring Lucas to the address to take his life. They were communicating on Snapchat and had already made an extensive multiple-step plan that would positively end in Lucas's death. The worst part was, the disappearing messages system made it disturbingly easy to coordinate the attack without leaving a clear trail. The moment Lucas arrived at their dedicated location, the two perpetrators jumped and stabbed him multiple times. He managed to escape the first time around, but was pursued relentlessly and stabbed once more. He eventually collapsed inside a local pub and died later in the hospital. Police later recovered messages showing the plan being laid out on Snapchat. While the nature of these messages made them harder to trace, they were recovered. The court described the attack as premeditated and unprovoked. And in August 2024, both Williams and Nelson Palmer were sentenced to life in prison. Level 4. Boiling water. On February 2nd, 2023, 18-year-old Princess Owusu Ansah snuck into a friend's house and poured scalding hot water on her. She proceeded to stab the victim in her legs, all while recording herself on Snapchat. According to the assailant, the woman had been involved with her boyfriend, and it quite literally boiled over into a violent one-sided confrontation. After pouring the boiling water on the woman, Princess began recording her reaction. In order to protect herself, the victim tried to shield her body with her bed's duvet. That didn't faze Princess at all, who then grabbed a knife and stabbed the victim in the leg. The video was posted to Snapchat shortly after, where it went viral almost instantly, and soon after, the authorities were called. By then, the victim had somehow managed to escape onto the street and was eventually taken to King's College Hospital. The injuries were serious but not life-threatening, but the trauma was forever. Police later used the Snapchat video as evidence. Princess was arrested and charged. She pleaded guilty to grievous bodily harm with intent and criminal damage. In May 2023, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The disturbing part of this case is, yet again, complete detachment to the extent of what the assailant was doing. Not once did she stop to think about the consequences of her actions, whether the entire thing was for 2 seconds of fame online or a nod to Princess's deeper, more violent nature. It was something that should have never happened. And frankly, Snapchat's accessibility features only made it easier. Delvin Mendoza. In December 2016, Delvin Mendoza Chaparro, a 20-year-old from Milwaukee, was attacked in an apartment after being accused of stealing a bong. He was beaten within an inch of his life and was, like most of these cases, recorded. The video showed the attackers hurting Delvin from multiple different perspectives, and each one was more severe than the other. He was not only rendered completely incapacitated, but was also constantly being mocked and humiliated. One video captured someone urinating on him. Another showed someone forcing him to eat from a litter box. After the attack, his body was taken and left in an alley during freezing weather. He was found later by a passerby and pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy confirmed blunt force trauma to the head as the cause of death. There were 3 attackers involved in the case. Devin Katzfey was the man primarily responsible for the attack. He eventually pleaded guilty to the first-degree reckless homicide and was sentenced to 27 years in prison. The 2 others involved consisted of Devin's brother, Brandon Katzfey, and a friend, Sarah Katzecki. They received 13 and 10 years respectively. The Snapchat video ended with someone saying, "That's what happens when you steal." These clips were posted directly to Delvin's own Snapchat story. Level 5. Scotty Boy 2002. David G. Nicole was a 51-year-old man from London, Ontario, who used Snapchat to contact younger users while pretending to be a teenager himself. His alias on the app was Scotty Boy 2002, which he used to create an entire new persona as a 14-year-old boy. He built his victims' trust by acting like a normal young person wanting to make friends. Again, impressionable young people cannot gauge how the internet can be easily misused. Over the course of a few months, Nicole began to push boundaries with the people he was friends with. He began targeting their curiosities by offering them money and other incentives like drugs in exchange for physical interactions. And like most of these cases, his actions remained hidden behind the very privacy-heavy design of Snapchat. He committed his first act in 2021, when he lured one of his victims to a shopping plaza and proceeded to take her to another location at gunpoint. It was this very case that made the London police issue warnings against him. Eventually, Nicole was arrested in 2023 after a detailed investigation. He was charged with several offenses that began in 2018 and kept going until his arrest. He was charged on multiple accounts that included contact-related offenses with young people that took place both offline and online. On multiple occasions, he would even go as far as to film his victims as a way to blackmail them. In 2024, he pled guilty to 7 of the charges and was given a 7-year sentence. That was eventually agreed upon by both the defense and prosecutor. The sentencing, however, did not sit right with most people. Nicole had been reported to the authorities multiple times before his official arrest, but nothing had been done about it. Most of the victims were too traumatized or ashamed to come out, and even after more than a year of his sentence, most of them are still suffering from social anxiety and depression. Talon Lowry. In another non-isolated incident that took place on November of 2017, a 19-year-old filmed himself walking up to a gas station in Gainesville, Georgia, and shooting the employee working there. Talon Lowry was a troubled man who had a history of filming himself performing the most unhinged acts of violence known to man. A few weeks before the dreaded He walked into the Shallowford Road Walmart and attacked a woman completely unprompted. While doing so, he shoved a camera in her face and filmed the entire thing on Snapchat. The woman recalled being hit so bad that she lost feeling in her legs and was desperately holding onto her shopping cart for balance. She further recalled in her testimony, "All I could see in your eyes was evil. You did nothing to help me and just stood there filming as long as you could." 2 weeks later, the same man walked into the Exxon gas station on Cleveland Highway and killed 18-year-old Brian Ramirez. Brian was an employee at the working station and had just gotten off his shift for a small break. He was sitting outside when the offender walked to him. Without any clear confrontation or warning, Lowry took out a rifle and shot Brian in his back. Like with the attack on the woman, he recorded the entire thing and posted the video to Snapchat shortly after. Lowry was arrested later that same day, and the weapon was recovered from his home. In 2023, he was found guilty of murder and several related charges. Although he did plead not guilty by reason of insanity, the court sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Sadly, his entire trial was as disturbing as the gravity of the crime he committed. According to reports, Lowry barely showed any remorse for what he had done. The victim's mother spoke specifically about his detached persona, commenting, "When I look at him, I just see that he's not sorry in any way and that he's not scared of anything." In addition to her, Lowry's father also gave his own statement and showed immense guilt toward the victims. He further added, "We've tried for 5 years to get him to be understood and get him the help he needs, the treatment he needs, because he's not an evil person, he lost his mind." The most tragic part of this entire case is the fact that, while Brian Ramirez and his family can never be compensated for what they lost, Lowry's actions ruined his own family irreversibly as well. His decision to record and share violent acts adds to growing skepticism behind the accessibility Snapchat offers its users. The platform didn't create the violence, but it was the medium through which it was shared with the world. Pulse nightclub. The Pulse nightclub shooting, or the Orlando shooting, is unarguably one of the most devastating mass shootings in the U.S. The ripple effects it had can still be felt to this day all over the country. But once you dive a little deeper into what really happened that night, you'd come across some fairly heartbreaking individual details. One such case is of 25-year-old Amanda Alvear. On June 12, 2016, Amanda and her friends were having a normal night out at Pulse nightclub in Orlando. Like many others that evening, she was simply enjoying her time and posting about it to Snapchat. Her story was a compilation of clips that showed her dancing and drinking with her friends and just being present in the moment. But then the tone shifted abruptly, almost hitting everyone watching her stories with a whiplash. Her last snap showed the music being suddenly cut, followed by the sound of excessive gunfire. She panned the camera to herself, and you could instantly tell something was very wrong. She had this devastating look of fear on her face, and the video cut off. Amanda was one of the 49 people who lost their lives that night. Her Snapchat story went viral and was shared widely afterward. It documented the sheer intensity of how quickly everything changed that night. And to think that the video captured the last few minutes of her life just makes this so much more soul-wrenching. Ollie Stevens. On January 21st, 30-year-old Ollie Stevens was stabbed to death in a field near his home in Reading, England. The entire attack was pre-planned by 3 teenagers who, like most of these cases, used Snapchat to coordinate what would become a fatal setup. A few weeks before the attack, Ollie had come across another disturbing video on Snapchat. It showed a boy being attacked and insulted by 2 older boys. Ollie did what any person would do. He forwarded the victim to the video's elder brother in order to let him and his family know what was going on. The 2 older kids took this personally and decided to confront Ollie themselves for being a snitch. Tragically, their plan was way more hostile than a normal teenage confrontation. They recruited an acquaintance of Ollie to help them lure him in. Despite not really having any prior issues with Ollie, the girl casually decided that he had it coming for him. She invited him to meet her at a playing field close to their community under the impression of a casual meetup. What he didn't know was that 2 boys were lying in wait to jump him. They ambushed him shortly after he arrived and started to attack him with their fists. Around that moment, Ollie was still defending himself and was alive. However, within minutes, one of the attackers produced a knife and stabbed him twice. The three offenders fled the scene instantly, leaving the victim to bleed out. In the days before the attack, the group had exchanged hundreds of messages and voice notes on Snapchat. Some of these messages showed the two boys being armed with knives. Others casually talked about teaching him a lesson, saying they would give him bangs or stab him. The girl didn't stand trial and admitted to manslaughter. She received 5 years in prison, while the boys, who were later convicted of murder, received 12 and 13 years. Ollie's case is especially difficult because of how young everyone involved was. None of them were older than 14, yet they had come up with this intricate plan that ended up taking a life. Plot. Tyrone Hassell III was a 23-year-old Army sergeant who had simply been visiting his family for the holidays in Michigan when he unexpectedly lost his life. On New Year's Eve 2018, he was shot multiple times outside his father's house. The ambush came as a surprise to everyone involved since Tyrone was a respected member of society and didn't have bad blood with anyone. Tragically, the victim did not survive. What initially looked like a random act of violence soon turned out to be much more disturbing. Tyrone was married to Camilla Hassell, another U.S. military personnel who had been stationed with him in South Korea. Both of them had a son together, and were as normal as any military family would be. However, below that cover, Camilla was hiding a secret. She was having an affair with another soldier stationed in South Korea, Jeremy Kuller. The two had been in a relationship way before their deployment and were planning on starting a life together. Instead of doing it normally, they decided that killing Tyrone would be the best course of action, and to plan it out, they used Snapchat. Over several weeks, they discussed how to get Tyrone out of the way on the platform, intricate details of what Jeremy would do and how Camilla would help. Eventually, Jeremy flew back to Michigan and followed Tyrone on his leave and waited for instructions. Camilla told him of Tyrone's plans and when he would be stepping out of the house alone. And that's when the attack happened. With the help of a few tips from the neighbors, the police figured out that Camilla had a much bigger role in the case. When questioned, she eventually admitted to her involvement. The couple's motive was to kill Tyrone in order to collect his life insurance benefits. Both were charged, and in 2019, Camilla received life in prison without parole. Jeremy was sentenced to 65 to 90 years. Level 6. Ellis Dismore. Ellis Dismore was a 24-year-old man from Middlesbrough who was considerably active on Snapchat. He used the platform to create multiple fake profiles to, yet again, lure in young people looking for friends on the platform. Over time, he contacted several young women pretending to be an ally and a friend. He built their trust through charming private messages, but eventually began crossing some serious boundaries. He began to use threats and manipulation to control these women who were already in a vulnerable state as is. In one case that gained particular attention, Dismore messaged a young woman under the alias of a young man called James Wilson. For the girl, James was just a normal, happy boy who was kind to her. They began talking more, and that's when the James persona dropped and a malicious, vile man emerged. Dismore started controlling the victim. He wouldn't let her meet her friends, he wouldn't let her go out, and would force her to send explicit photos. When the girl tried to cut contact, he began sending extremely troubling voice notes, not just to her, but also to her family. These messages were aggressive and clearly meant to intimidate. And yet again, almost all of them were sent via Snapchat because of the app's disappearing message feature. The situation escalated in June 2023 when Dismore showed up to her locality in person. He was seen buying steak knives a few weeks prior to the attack. He targeted the girl while she was walking home under the pretense of a medical emergency. When she tried to help, he took after her and stabbed her 5 times. The incident was captured by a nearby car's dash cam. She was taken to the hospital and recovered with help from a passerby. Following his arrest, further investigation revealed that Dismore had been in contact with multiple young people over a period of years, often through anonymous or deceptive accounts. In early 2025, he was sentenced to over 4 decades in prison. Aiden Fucci. Aiden Fucci was just 14 years old when he was arrested in connection with the disappearance and murder of 13-year-old Tristan Bailey. The case gained national attention because of the sheer severity of the crime a young man like him had committed. But there was another reason why it received so much coverage. Fucci was arrested under the suspicion of killing his classmate and put into the back of a cop car. He pulled out his phone and took a Snapchat selfie. In the photo, he held up a peace sign and included the caption, "Hey guys, has anybody seen Tristan lately?" It wasn't long before investigators connected the dots. Fucci had stabbed Tristan 114 times. After Fucci was confirmed as the killer, the implications of the selfie he had sent from police custody wasn't random began to manifest. The pure unhinged malice inside a man so young was very hard for people to swallow. What's worse was the fact that there was no motive behind Tristan's stabbing. He didn't have any bad blood with her whatsoever. He literally only killed her because he was bored and wanted to feel something. Fucci later pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Because of his age at the time of the crime, he will be eligible for a sentence review after 25 years. Dehumanization. In 2021, resident of Columbus, Ohio, Drew Mandelbaum lost his life in a particularly brutal attack. The man responsible was 33-year-old Timothy Kendrick, who filmed himself beating and stabbing Drew repeatedly. He posted over 70 videos of the assault onto Snapchat. These clips were completely unhinged and violent. Kendrick was continuously stabbing and hitting Drew while simultaneously throwing the most demeaning insults at him. Some of the footage consisted of the victim profusely bleeding yet begging Kendrick to let him go, while others showed Kendrick being momentarily nice to Drew simply to give him a false sense of security. There were also disgusting clips of the offender calling him the King of Columbus and calling the victim a loser. It's one of the most dehumanizing cases ever. By the time Kendrick was finished, Drew was already dead. He had 40 stab wounds on his body and a deep cut to the neck. Even then, the offender wasn't done. He wrapped the victim's body in a shower curtain, poured inflammable liquid on it, and set it on fire. Afterwards, he moved the body to a more remote location where it was found by a woman working in a nearby office. Kendrick was arrested shortly after the videos were reported. He eventually pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but not without his own montage of dramatic self-pitying statements. He begged the judge to give him one more chance since this incident was making him the best version of himself, to which the judge mirrored most of the public's opinion. The defendant has not really taken responsibility for anything. He still invokes a victim stance. Kendrick will remain in prison for the rest of his life. Level 7. Chandler Halderson. In July 2021, Bart and Krista Halderson from Wisconsin were reported missing by their son, Chandler. He told police they had gone to their cabin for the weekend but had never returned. When authorities began to look into their disappearances, they realized Chandler had a much bigger role than he initially let on. Chandler had spent months lying to his parents about going to college and working a job he didn't have. According to investigators, his parents had eventually found out, which ended in a confrontation Chandler didn't appreciate. What followed was the offender's decision to literally get rid of his parents before they pestered him more about their expectations from him. He shot his father with a rifle he received from a friend and texted his mother to come back home. She was also killed instantly when she arrived. He then proceeded to dismember both of his parents' body and scatter them around the area so they wouldn't be found. Thankfully, the reason the case turned around was, for once, SnapMap. Chandler's girlfriend Kat had been using Snapchat's location feature to keep tabs on him in case he was ever unfaithful. This ended up helping the police in their search when they accessed her data for the investigation. The location feature allowed them to pinpoint Chandler's movements on the day of the murder. When they searched the area linked to one of those times, they discovered his mother's remains. In 2022, Chandler was convicted on multiple charges of murder. He's now serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Angela Wrightson. Angela Wrightson was a 39-year-old woman living in Hartlepool, England, who was a known alcoholic in the area. However, despite that, she was well liked by the community and was also known as a kind person. She did, however, have a history of providing young people with alcohol, cigarettes, and chocolates, and was fairly vulnerable in the area with how she kept her house open to anyone. On the night of December 8th, 2014, 2 girls came over to Angela's house. Angela had bought them cider and rolling tobacco earlier that evening, so naturally one would assume they went back there to thank her or get some more. Sadly, that was not the case. At some point that night, the 2 girls had launched a prolonged and brutal attack on Angela. The assault lasted around several hours. During that time, they used a wide range of household items to harm her, including a shovel, a TV, a coffee table, and a printer. Angela sustained over 100 injuries, with her body found in a completely battered condition. During the initial moments of the attack, one of the girls took a Snapchat selfie. The picture consisted of the 2 offenders posing all happy while Angela is visible in the background, clearly injured and slumped on the couch. The image was uploaded casually on the platform with no indication of what was actually happening, especially considering how around that time, Angela had only sustained minor bruises that were barely visible. After the attack, the girls left the house at around 2 a.m. and called the police. That, ironically, was not to report what they had done, but to ask for a ride. In the back of the police van, they took another Snapchat selfie, smiling. Angela's body was discovered by her landlord later that morning on December 9th. The scene was described by authorities as horrific. The 2 girls were arrested the same day. During their trials, they were described as laughing during police interviews and showing little remorse. They were eventually found guilty and sentenced to life with a minimum of 15 years each. However, because of their ages, their identities were never released. We talk about a lot of disturbing stuff that YouTube won't let us show, so if you want to see more unrestricted content as well as an exclusive Level 8 for this video, be sure to check out our Patreon in the description below.